It's 9 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Before we make our introductions, just have a few housekeeping procedures to go over. Firstly, we are recording this session, so if you need to refer back to it or some of your colleagues weren't able to attend today, it will be available on our YouTube channel later this week. If you're not asking a question, we'd prefer you all to have your microphone on mute so there isn't any interruption to the presentation. Cameras are 100% optional, but sometimes when you're speaking, it is nice to see your face. There's one button on your screen I'd like you all to avoid hitting. It's a little rectangle with an up arrow. That's the share screen button. Please do not click that, as that will interrupt the presentation. If and when you have questions, you can either unmute yourself and jump in, or raise your hand with the raise hand feature, or put the questions into the chat and I will prompt Timo. If there are any technical issues, please put those into the chat and I will do my best to help you through those. Just be aware most of the time those technical issues stem from your own Wi-Fi connection. And finally, if anyone has dialed in today via telephone, please send me an email at mfrey@pgahq.com so we can get your your PDR credits. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Steve Saracki, who will be making our introductions this morning. Steve.
Yep, thanks, Matt. Thanks again, Timo, for coming on and helping us out here in the section. So Timo is a longtime Stack and Tilt coach, a good friend of mine, and he's the creator of the Stack and Tilt putting system, a structured, geometry-based approach to putting designed to give players and coaches clear, repeatable reference points on the greens. He's more than 20 years experience of teaching and 15 years in our Stack and Tilt system. After running his own academy in the Netherlands for 10 years, Timo moved to Spain, where he's now based at the Stack and Tilt Academy at the prestigious La Cindienda Links Golf Resort. Timo holds a Bachelor of Sport and Physical Education from the University of Applied Sciences of Amsterdam, with a strong academic background in anatomy, biomechanics, and motor learning. His work is centered on translating sound principles into practical coaching tools that instructors can apply immediately with their players. He works with golfers and coaches at all skill levels, and focus is strong on clarity, structure, and measurable results. And I would also just say, Timo's really helped me along with my putting. After seeing a lot of these diagrams that you guys are going to see, I think it's going to be really clear and eye-opening to start seeing a picture and have some good reference points and checkpoints in your putting system. So Timo, if you want to get started, it's all you.
Thank you. Let's get going. Steve, first of all, thank you for the invitation, and Matt for setting this all up. A subject that everybody was waiting for. I say that as a joke because I remember when I started building out this system for putting, I was in the network with Andy Plummer and Steve and all the guys, and I didn't really have a system for putting, and I didn't do as many putting lessons as I think most of us don't do huge amount of putting lessons. Even now, I think maybe only 15% of my lessons are purely focused around putting. But it has gotten more over time as I started to use a system which made it for me easier to give a good putting lesson, because back in the days I really didn't know what a good putting lesson was about, because it was all feel. I was a pretty good putter back when I played, and if something didn't work, we change one thing, right? If it doesn't work, you just change this thing. So for me, that was what putting lessons were about, changing the tool, changing the putter. But obviously there is way more to it than that. And in my endeavor to try to build out the Stack and Tilt system for putting, I looked at other people, what they were doing. So I've spent a lot of time with Andy Plummer, obviously talking about putting, but about using a system for golf and how you can translate that into your putting game. I've spent quite a bit of time with David Orr, which I think is a great mentor of mine. So if you want to learn more about putting, I would definitely also look out on he has a program, the Flat Stick program. You might be familiar with it. And I've spent time with Mark Sweeney and Jamie Donaldson on the aim point. So those are all guys that I would definitely highly recommend to find more info about putting stuff. And putting those all together, that gave me some sort of a system for putting. That is what this presentation is going to be about. Now, when Steve said that I had an hour, I was a little shocked because it's very difficult to put it all in 1 hour. So I'm going to focus on some of the main things that helped me in becoming a better putting coach. But there's obviously way more to it than just this presentation. And as Matt said before, if there's any questions, don't hold back, just jump in straight away, because if we have the slide up and you got a question about one of those topics, then it's always easier that you just ask the question as we have the picture up there. So there we go. So the first thing that I would say when you start building a system is that you need to understand what is variable and what is fundamental. And Steve, that should sound familiar to you, that question, because we heard that so often when Andy Plummer taught us the system that he uses, the stack and tilt system, he's always starting with that one. So for me, it was a very logical step to do that in the same order in building out a system for putting. And with putting, it might be even harder to find things that players are doing the same, because there are so many things that are not doing the same. So I've just put up a slide over here about the grip, and I've just took 8 different grips over there, but there's probably another 40 or 50 different grip styles that you have over there. And how would I know as a coach which grip to use, right? You can go from the standard overlap that you see on the top on the left, which is probably one of the most used ones, but you got all these funky grips these days about pencil grips and claw grips. And then you can even I could just make one picture with probably 5, 6, 7 pictures with different kinds of claw grips, right? I've put 2 up there. Just as an example, you got the 1-finger claw and the 4-finger claw, and how would I know which grip is the best for me? And in trying to answer that question, even today, I'm always seeing that question basically as a two-way system. It could be that I'm building up a new player, so beginner player, that comes to me to learn golf, and I can build something from scratch, or a player that is already playing the game and he comes in with something, and I think that's a very different starting point. And as we go down this presentation, I will say something about both those situations. But it's a very different starting point if I start up with a player and teaching him from scratch, or if a player comes in that already has a history with golf. But this picture is just to illustrate that there's a lot of variables in the game, and grip is just one of them. And the question then would be, can we recognize good players by how they grip the putter? And the answer obviously is no, because these grips are used by tour winners, all of them. Is there something else then that we can look at that how you can recognize good players? Can we maybe look at stance and posture? So I made a little slide over here with a lot of different styles of putting. As you can see, I got 2 extremes there on the top left. We got Michelle Wie over there in her time when she was bending over all the way, like the tabletop, right? And you got Bernard Langer just to the right of that, and they couldn't be further apart in the flexion extension spectrum. But you got all these styles over there. I've got that picture in the middle on the top row of Bryson when he was standing to the side and doing his putting thing. Obviously, we got Tiger over there, who's clearly been a very good putter over his career. And the question there would be, again, can we recognize a good putter by one of these pictures, how they set up to the ball? And also the answer there would be no. The thing that strikes the most is that they all do it differently. And how am I going to build a system? How am I going to help the next person coming in for a putting lesson? Which stance and posture and which grip am I going to advise? Where do I start? And in doing that, one of the first things that I did, I was just gathering a lot of pictures and videos and taking one variable and just start categorizing those, make a spectrum of those. So here on this next slide, I just made a spectrum of the arm alignment from the down the line perspective. So you got the player on the left who has the arms the furthest out or away from underneath his shoulders, the furthest away. And slowly, as you move the pictures to the right, you can see how those arms are getting further inside the shoulder line. And that is a way, what we would call a spectrum, to show how you look at the same thing and how people do it differently. The problem with that, though, is it doesn't give me a clear direction yet of which one to choose, but at least I get a little bit more order because I'm now looking at one thing. So this picture over here, if I go one slide back, I'm looking at a million things at the same time that are different, and I'm slowly starting to narrow down my view to one thing that is different, and which in this case is the arm alignment. Now, obviously, I could look at that one from the down the line perspective, but I could also look at that one from the face on perspective over here. And you can see how different players set up their arms differently. Just as an example, if we go to the extremes, you got the guy on the left who has the trail arm adducted the most and externally rotate the most. And then you go all the way to the right. I have to move my box here a little bit. You see You see the opposite. If you look at the trail arm, you see the trail arm that's abducted the most and internally rotated the most. And the question there would be, which one is better? And another question would be, if you would measure the two strokes from the guy all the way on the left and the guy all the way on the right, would their stroke, would their mechanics, would the technique be the same? And the answer obviously is no, it wouldn't be the same. But it's important to start narrowing down the path of what I'm going to teach my players by at least acknowledging all the differences that there are and how they've been used by different players. But this picture, if I go to the next slide, this picture could also be a spectrum for many other things. So as you start lining up these pictures of these different players, you can look at the arms, but I could also make this into a spectrum on ball position, because you see some players there that have the ball more forward. You see some players that have the ball more to the middle. And as you keep looking at the same picture over and over again, you slowly start to recognize some of the things. One of the things on ball position, for example, on these pictures, there's not that many players that have, I did something with my screen here. Is that, oh, there it is. There's not that many players that have the ball back in their stance. Apart from this one, can everybody see my cursor when I move that on the screen, by the way?
Yeah, and Timo, you can probably slide that little camera thing
down?
off the screen. Yeah.
Oh, great.
There you go.
Yeah, you just let me know when there is a question, right? So I don't pay attention to this box anymore, okay?
You got it.
Got it. So there's only one player here that has the ball further back, and that is also the one amateur player in this whole line of pictures. So you can start recognizing certain things when you look at pictures long enough, but most of the players have the ball somewhere in the middle or more towards the front side of things instead of back, which I think is an interesting thing to see on this picture. But you could look at ball position, you could look at the handle position, the button of the club position. You could make this a spectrum into shaft lean, because not everybody is doing that the same way. We got Jack over here who has obviously more shaft lean. We got a little bit of shaft lean on the picture on the right, but they are all pretty close to vertical. You could make it a foot flare spectrum. The whole point there is that if you start lining these pictures up, is that you'll learn a lot of you're training your eye in seeing differences. But where you really want to go to is figuring out why are these players good? Why are they good putters? Why are they good players? And that comes back to the same three questions as we always answer or try to answer with stack and tilt. And that will be the three fundamentals, or the function of the stroke, the function of the swing. So fundamental number one, for the people that are familiar with stack and tilt, is contact. Well, I haven't seen many players that try to hit a putt and miss the ball. Even beginners, they can hit the ball. So I would say the fundamental number one becomes the ability to start the ball on the intended line. And these fundamentals become my way of analyzing a player as well. So as somebody is rolling a few putts, I'm looking at these fundamentals and I'm just answering the question, does this player have the ability to start the ball straight? So what I would usually do is just get a straight putt, 3 meters, 10 feet, and I'll just ask them to roll a few balls, and just standing down the line, making my video on the target line, and trying to see if the player is able to start the ball on the intended line, if he or she can tick the first checkbox off. Then the second fundamental, which is distance in our system, becomes the ability to control the distance the ball rolls out, which is a very important skill, obviously, and probably one of the harder ones to teach new golfers, because they have a very hard time in controlling the speed. And the last one will be the predictable curve. And for putting, that will be the green reading, because we can't make a ball draw really, because there's too much friction on the ground. So I would say that's the green reading, and I always advise people to do aim point for that, because I think Mark Sweeney built a great system on reading the greens. But those will be the fundamentals. That will be the place to start, and that will be my tool to organize my lesson and ask myself and ask the player, like, okay, which part of your putting game needs the most amount of attention? Do you need more help in starting the ball straight? Do you need more help controlling where the ball stops to the hole? Or is it more about you tend to start them good and your distance control is pretty spot on, but you just misread the green the whole time? And obviously you need work in all three with most players, but at least it gives me a very clear starting point on where to go. Now, if we have that starting point, let's say I'm building a player up from the get-go, from scratch, I can start with a clean slate, and I can build things up by having a model. So I would try to make most players use the same model. And I know that's sometimes a risky thing to say because the model and system is sometimes still a word that we don't like to hear, but I think it's a great thing. And I have no problem with telling you that I move players towards a model. And the reason I move players towards a model is because I know the model works. And if you know that the model works, you can start comparing a model to what is happening in front of you. Does the player move according to the model? And if not, you can start to see the differences, and you can start to explain differences in the outcome on the three fundamentals. So if people start to look the same putting-wise, it's not because I want them to look the same, but it's because I would want them to control the same fundamentals. And in my book, that means that they start to look the same for that reason, because I can start designing an easy model to perform the fundamentals, or I can start designing a model that makes it very hard to control them. And I think most good players have a fairly easy model to use, so they can control the most important things of their game. So this would be the putting grid. That is the diagram that Steve spoke about as well when he introduced me. And people familiar with stack and tilt should be familiar with most of these lines. I'll go over them for now. Most important line first, the target line, obviously. And then the center of the swing, this vertical black line that you see over there, is the lead shoulder. So whenever I put this diagram on the ground, I can draw a center line, and that will be straight underneath the left shoulder. So even in putting, I still believe, for the modeling purpose, that the left shoulder is the center of the stroke. Then the most important thing from there is that this radius, which is the arm and the putter from the radius, and that is where the biggest change is as well in comparison to a full swing. Now, just a question to the group. How many people are familiar with the stack and tilt grid? When they see these lines on the ground, is everybody okay with that?
Darren, if you have a question, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, or is that just
Oh, sorry about that. I was looking for the chat.
Oh, gotcha. Go ahead.
Yeah, can I go?
I think so.
Okay. So in building this grid for putting, again, the biggest change, why this looks different than a full swing grid, is because the radius is angled, right? So my arm and club in a full swing, we would teach people to line the radius up, get the arm and club more in line with more shaft lean. That is the biggest change in this picture over here, is because we play the putting game with an angled radius. So when you look at this picture that will be on the ground, this angle would be your arm, and the angle over here, which is pretty vertical, would be the putter. Now that does a very important thing to the arc, because the tangent moves back. So usually the stack and tilt grid, you would swing on an arc, you would come back down on the arc, you go down and out, down and out, down and out until the center line, because you keep hitting down and out until you reach the center point. Because you moved the radius back a little bit, you moved the tangent of the radius back. The zero on the path, the zero on the arc over here is further back as well. We'll dive into that a little bit later as well, more extensively. But the radius is the big change. And obviously there is less arc because the putter sits way more vertical. So this will be a model, so you can start looking at your stroke. You could put this on the ground for people. And you can even sketch this on your videos when you're filming people, and you can start explaining how they move and how they move in comparison to a model. Now, moving on to that one, I'd like to put this slide in there because there's a lot of debate about arcs, right? Some people say that the putting stroke is straight back, straight through. We got all these templates these days with different amounts of arcs. And which arc should you choose? That is a big question. So I just wanted to point this out to everybody, that I think the amount of arc is different for a couple of reasons, but there's only three things really that make a particular arc. So the first thing would be over here would be the length of the radius, and that would be the distance from the sweet spot to the center of rotation of the radius. So you remember back in my model, the left shoulder, the lead shoulder was the center. So I would have to measure the distance from the left shoulder to the sweet spot, and that becomes the length of the radius, which we'll see in a picture when we go one slide further along. But that is one thing that controls it, because the shorter the radius, you will see more arc. The longer the radius, you will see less arc. And that shows up over here in this picture over here at the bottom. But the other thing that changes is the lie angle of the radius. You saw it already in the picture over here. I'll just jump back over here. Not everybody has the exact same lie angle, and that has an influence on how much arc will show up as well. And the last thing, you could set that up. So the first two would be static, that will be in your setup. But I can overrule my arc by the movements of the body, because that is the in motion thing that I need to control. So just over here, these two pictures, the blue and the green, they have the same size radius. So you can see how the arc is as wide on both pictures, but the vertical swing plane is different. So on the blue arc, the vertical swing plane is more vertical. And on the green arc, the putter sits down a little bit more, and you can see when you put that on the target line over here that changes the arc, although the radius length is the same. If we jump back to this picture over here on the right, the red and the black have the same vertical swing plane, the same lie angle, you could say, but the size of the radius is different. So the black one is a shorter radius, and you can see how that arcs in more than the red one over there. Next one. If I take this model that I was sketching out on the ground over here with my arcs and my radius, to some people, to you coaches, that might give you something, right? But most golfers, when they just see those lines for the first time, they're a little bit confused, because the lines doesn't really tell them anything. It doesn't mean anything to them. So you have to do another step, which is build a framework for analysis. So now you can put all those lines on a golfer. So here we have the face-on view. Like I said earlier, the lead shoulder is the center, and here you can see the angled radius. And not everybody angles that radius the same way, but you can start recognizing it for yourself. So if I just jump back to this picture over here from the face on, you can see how they all form the radius a little differently. So the golfer here on the far right has the has the elbow further out, then has more flexion in the elbow over here. But the putter goes back to pretty much vertical. There's a little bit of shaft-lean on this one, but clearly that's a way different radius than, for example, over here, which is more lined up, as you can see. And I think it's important to understand the concept of the radius, because that is the thing that you have to control throughout your stroke, and you wouldn't want to see a lot of change in the radius. So that starts with how you set it up. Now, these could all work. And I've heard that many times as well. It can all work. But as a coach, I like to give my players less options to begin with. Let's build one stroke that work where you know that it works. And let's not look at 20 other ways of doing it. Back to this picture. So the arm, which is the first segment of the radius, and then the last part of the radius is the putter itself, which is almost vertical. We'll get into that a little bit on the next slide. Then if you want to move that around, that is still, I only have an arm and a putter now. I have to add the body to the movement as well. So that's why I'm still drawing in the axis of the stroke, or the axis of the swing, you could say, which is the two centers, the center of the shoulder turn and the center of the hip turn. And that will be connected to the center with a third segment. And the reason I'm doing that, because now I have basically a full body to perform a stroke. So my model can actually hit a ball. Now, if this model would start moving, there will be two arcs that we would keep an eye out on. It will be the arc of the hands on the backstroke and follow through, and it would obviously be the arc of the putter head itself. Now, same lines over here on the down the line picture. You can see the angled radius, and we saw over here that not everybody angles the radius the same way. This is more in line, as you can see, and this will be the most amount of bend in the elbow. So which one would have a shorter radius? That will be over here, right? In comparison to that one. Although the guy on the left could still shorten the radius. Let me just make sure that you can see my camera. So I need to see what you guys see over here. Can you see me when I'm over here?
Yes, we can.
Good. So the guy on the left sets up with the longest radius, sets itself up to have that long radius stroke around him, but he could still make that into a short radius by moving the wrist, because now the center of rotation of the radius is more in the wrist than it is up here. So that is what I meant earlier when I said the arc is controlled by three things. It's the length of the radius, it's the lie of the radius, but the movement of the body can override everything. And I think that's an important concept for a coach as well to understand. So back to this picture. When I film, by the way, I film on the target line. When I do the full swing, I always film more on the axis, but when I film the putting stroke, I'm always on the target line because all the movement happens in front of the player. There's never a point in time, obviously, that the arms and the club go behind the player. So I like to set it up on the target line, and then I can just start drawing these arcs on my screen. So I like to have the ball in the middle of my screen, draw a straight line to the hole over there, and then I will actually draw that line in when I do the analysis with my players, which gives me the baseline, the target line, and from there I can start sketching in the arc for them. And I can start explaining, now, well, your putter sits at an angle, therefore it makes an arc. We can project that arc onto the ground. That will be slightly arcing in on the backstroke and arcing in on the follow-through. And then you can start comparing that model that you've drawn in there to what they're actually doing as you're scrolling through their stroke. Here you can see the rest of the picture that I have over here. So this picture, which you see as a player looking down on the ground, is now also in this picture on the ground. You can see the angled radius over there. Now that is a lot of theory. Let's make it into something practical. So as I'm building a model, I think there are some key points, or there are a few key points that I like to look at. And the first one has to do with the tool. And that is to understand the design of the putter, because they're all built differently. So I just took three different putter designs over here. There's a million more. But I always ask players, I had an online lesson with somebody from the United States actually last week, and I asked them to make a video of the putter they're using, and I asked them to make the video like this. So this is my putter there. I'm holding it out on the ground, because every putter is designed differently, and therefore they need to be set up differently. And you can see that from the top-down picture. And what I mean by that, if you look at this first picture over here, you can see that the leading edge, if I place the club how it's supposed to be, you can see how the leading edge cuts through the middle of the shaft. And we call that offset, as you probably know. So this putter has more or less half a shaft offset. And that is how this putter is designed to use. But I could take that putter and set it up with more offset, push the handle forward more, or push the handle further back. And now you're setting the putter up how it's not designed to be. Saying that, if I have half a shaft over here, you can really see that. That becomes a very clear point for a player to focus on and to be very consistent in their setup, because I can look down this putter on the ground and have the first part of the shaft go through the middle of the face. Now, my putter isn't half a shaft offset, so it's a little different for me. But when you look down the shaft, you can clearly get that reference point. But again, it's not the same for everyone, for every putter, because if we go to the picture on the middle over here, I'm drawing the same line on the blade, on the leading edge, and you can see how this putter has a full shaft offset. So here, the player should see that the leading edge sits fully behind the shaft. Now, if I would push that handle forward, you will start seeing a gap over here between the back edge of the shaft and the leading edge. And if it is too far back, it will start looking like the picture on the left. And here we got another one, and we got everything in between. But this one has like almost a shaft and a half, almost two shafts offset as well. So you have to understand the tool that you're using and set it up in the right way. So when you go back to this picture, and you look at the shaft alignment, my question as a coach is, do they have that shaft alignment differently because they use different putters? And I would like to say yes. I would think they set it up different because they hold a different tool. Now, if you look at Jack over here, for example, who has the most amount of shaft lean, if he would deliver that same amount of shaft lean, this putter needs a different loft than the one that is delivered at impact more vertical. So there's a little bit of club design in that as well, but it all starts out with understanding the tool that you're using. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, this was the one thing that I would change the most. If I drive back home, I probably got like 20, 25 putters that I used over my career in playing, because I thought that would be the thing that would change my game. Now I am of the opinion that I should be able to take any of those 25 putters and start the ball straight. I should be able to take any of those 25 putters and control the distance. And obviously it doesn't interfere with my green reading because that has nothing to do with this one. But I like the idea that your technique becomes so good that you can take whatever putter and still perform the fundamentals of your putting game, because my understanding of the technique is way more valuable than just a tool that can do anything on its own. And I think that's an important thing that I try to teach my players as well, because that takes them away from putting is all feel. Of course, there's feel involved. There's feel involved in the full swing as well. But their training and their understanding of how things work override the putter, I would say. And that gives them a little bit of confidence as well. So the first thing in the setup, I like to make sure that my players set up the putter properly. So the first thing I would do, I would film from the face on, I would film from down the line, I would take their putter, and I would just look at their putter, put it on the ground, and try to figure out how the loft should sit on the ground. And as I do that, I try to get a reference for, okay, this putter has a full shaft offset. I'll show it to my player. Can you see how the shaft sits fully behind the leading edge? And I'll start explaining how they have to set up their tool. Next key concept. I touched on that earlier when I started explaining the arc and the tangent. And just on that, the tangent is the point where the arc touches the target line, and that is where we find the zero. But that is only in this model. And you find the zero there because the arc, the amount the arc goes in, is equal on the backstroke over here as it is on the follow through. So TrackMan would call that swing direction in your full swing. And that means if you get to the tangent of this arc, the path should be close to zero and the face should be close to zero, which I think is a great starting point for controlling fundamental number one, is that you get close to zero. Now I'm aware that not every tour player plays 0-0. So if you put people on a Sam putt lap, they will not all be 0-0. But I do think we can agree that 0-0 would pretty much work. In that, I'm assuming that the face is square to the path, obviously, and that gives me a putt 2A from the putt tree, which I will get to in a second. So I know how this putt works. I know if I hit it on zero path with a zero face, that ball should start pretty straight. Obviously, there's a million things that go into that as well. I can hit it off center, the face could open, I could lose some energy. There's lots more going on. But in starting to build a system for people that they can understand and they can repeat, I think the 0-0 concept is a very nice one. But I also have to start explaining that when they then make the putt and the ball doesn't start straight, I have to start categorizing those misses as well. So that's why I designed the putt tree, which is the same as the stack and tilt shot tree. And that explains where putts are going, because there's 3 putts basically that could go in. So we'll go over those quickly. So I said over here, if I use this arc and I hit it on the tangent, the face is 0, the path is 0, and that will be putt number 2A. So if I jump to my diagram over here, you find diagram number 2A. That is the hold straight putt where the path is square, and square is less than a degree, and the face to the target is square as well. So it's this one. But obviously I could have this stroke, so my swing direction is pretty much 0, but if the face is open, I would miss it to the right, so that would be putt 2C. I could also have the swing direction pretty 0, but the face too closed, and that will be putt 2B. So I can start putting people into buckets of what they do. And you'll see loads of people that come in. I think most of the people that I've taught putting, if they're not 2A, they tend to be more in diagram number 3. That's what I see the most. It could be different over there, but that's what I see the most, is that will be the people that arc it in and then push it more down the line or even out a little bit. So the outward path would be diagram number 3 over there. But that one could also work, right? We've seen all these funky strokes from our students that go way in, out, or the other way around, but let's say way in, out for now, and they'll hole a few putts as well. because obviously they can have the face closed at the same time, which would make it 3E, a hold push. So the path is going to the right, but at the same time the face is twisted closed, so it doesn't push to the right and it goes into the hole. The question there becomes, if somebody is 3E, are you going to change him to 2A? And if it is always 3E, the answer would be no. But most of the times it isn't always 3E, because there's some trade-off into that arc going out, because you will see that if you ask them to hole a few more putts, they'll be 3A or 3C, or they'll close the face too much and it becomes 3B. So there's always this discussion, and I use this diagram a lot actually to lure the people in to make the change, because sometimes you have to convince them that you have to make a change. But 2A is the model, but I do appreciate that there's different ways of getting the ball in the hole. On the other side, obviously, the out to in with the face open could also work. Now, if you would ask players that are 3E, for example, with the face closed and the path going out to the right, it's always interesting to ask them as well about what they prefer in the slope of the green, if they prefer the right to lefters and the left to righters, because sometimes you can figure out why a certain putt feels easier to them. So for example, if they're more 3A, they have the face pretty square to the arc, but they always push it out to the right a little bit. So on average, their ball would, so that will be, I'm overdoing it, right? But that will be this stroke. The face is pretty square, but it goes out to the right a little bit. They probably prefer the right to left putts because they will always come back to the hole. So sometimes people can't really say much about their technique, like how is your putting? It's always just good or just bad. But if you ask them questions about how they perform on the tilted surface, that gives you a little bit more insight on how their technique works. Because if they can't say anything else about their technique rather than good or bad, and you ask them, do you prefer the right to left or the left to right? You have a little bit of an answer already, which I think is interesting to see. Next one. Another key point for the setup is enough forward bend. We've seen over here, let's go back a little bit. What is enough? Well, that's a good question, because they're not the same. Michelle over here, obviously the most amount of forward bend, but I guess we all know the player that stands too straight up and down, and there's no room for the hands to work around the axis or work underneath the shoulders. So I like to make a checkpoint of that for my down the line picture and make sure that there is enough anterior pelvic tilt so that the forward bend doesn't only come from the upper spine. You see that a lot as well, where the belt line stays horizontal and people just bend over from the top of their spines. So I like to see enough anterior pelvic tilt combined with some flexion of the thoracic and the cervical. And especially the cervical is important because that points the eyes more down, which is a great benefit for seeing your line easier. I think on average, in a putting lesson, when I change something in the setup, most people I will tell to get their chin more down, so they look straighter down on the line, and that has a big influence on how they perceive the straight line. And the chin down helps a lot in that. So that's one of the points as well that I like to get ready in the setup, because I believe if you get the setup right, that makes things a little bit easier. But in building a model, we already established that not everybody is doing it the exact same way. So that's why I came up with different models. And I've put them both here in one slide. And the biggest change over there is where the tangent is. So where you will find the 0, 0. We established it over here, right? You find the 0, 0 at the tangent. But these have two different ball positions, basically, or they should have two different ball positions, because it's two different models. And I call them the clamp and the flying wedge. So let me just show you what I mean by that. The clamp is the one that I had over here already. So that is this picture inside over here. So you see the red one with the blue arcs. And I call that the clamp because the wedge or the angle on the wrist on both sides is more or less the same. So that means the two wrists work as a clamp that holds the putter. And that could be left hand high or left hand low, but it's more or less the same angle. You can see in that picture that the tangent is further back than in the other model that I will discuss in a second over there. And it's important to point out to people that the tangent is created in the setup. So basically, wherever I put the putter on the ground, was the putter visible as well when I stand over here?
Yes, it is.
Good. So whenever I put the putter on the ground, let me put the ball there. Because people ask all the time, where do I place the ball in putting? Well, it's not the same for everyone, but I'm always starting with where do I place the putter? Where do I place the blade? So not even, especially this one, it's a big design, right? So where I place the putter, well, it depends a little bit on what part of the putter I'm looking at. So when I'm talking about the putter, I'm always talking about the blade, the thing that I'm actually hitting the ball with. So I'll be very specific with players where they place the blade. And for the clamp model, as a starting point, because not every clamp is the exact same, obviously, but as a starting point, I would say the blade needs to be in the middle of your stance. So as I'm building that out over here, I place the blade in the middle of my stance, and therefore the ball is slightly to the left. If I would have the ball in the middle, which is what people tend to do a lot of the times, that would actually place the ball further back on the arc, and now I'm prone to hit it too early on the arc, and my path would tend to go out. So ball position is a big thing in controlling your path through the ball. So in explaining this model, I would say the blade goes into the middle of your stance. And with the blade in the middle, you can see how the two angles in my wrist are more or less the same, and that will be the clamp model. Now, the other model that I have over there with the tangent more forward is one that you see on tour quite a bit as well. Matt Kuchar will be one of those, or Bryson will be one of those now. They have the ball further forward, and I call that the flying wedge model. From the flying wedge in the full swing with the trail wrist bent back, but there's more angle in the trail wrist, like your full swing. There's more angle in the trail wrist than there is in the lead wrist, and the flying wedge is maintained in your full swing coming through. So that will be this model over here with the ball further forward, with the handle further forward, and therefore there is more bent back on my right wrist than there is on the lead wrist. And those could be with the other hand, with the hands the other way around. And if I swap my hands over, this is how I would putt. You can see how that increases the amount of extension in my trail wrist even a little bit more over here. So the tangent is further forward. And again, I mentioned that to all my players, the tangent, the 0-0 is created in your setup. So that point on the ground where the putter sits now becomes the change in direction. That is where people should see that if I cross that point, my putter should start working inwards on the arc. Now, obviously, those two different models have different moves in the body, because the preset with the, sorry, I'm going to jump back. The preset on the flying wedge has more adduction on the trail arm to get the handle forward. So that needs more adduction coming through as well than the other stroke needs. It's a different preset, and I want to make sure that that radius is maintained coming through. That's another big thing that I'll practice all the time with players, is that if they set up with a particular radius, whatever the model is that they learn how to finish that the same way. So the wrist angles are more or less the same. The rotation around the shaft is more or less the same, which I think is very important to get the starting point right and then get the finish right, so they can start seeing how it should be the same thing. I practiced loads of times where I ask people to make a putt, hold the finish, and then I'll jump in and I'll just rotate it back to show them that they changed something. And that could be the twist of the shaft, or that could be the arc going out. But it's very important for people to have a measurement point for when they're not with you, which will be the finish, because they're not gonna, we have to be honest, right? They're not gonna film their swing, so they're definitely not gonna film their stroke. At least most of the people that I teach. I mean, good players obviously will do that if you ask them, but most people that you teach won't take the time to put a tripod on the green and film a few putts. But they need a reference. They need something to see if they're on the right track. And I would use the setup, and I would definitely use the finish for that. Any questions on those two models? Is everybody okay with that?
Nothing's been submitted yet. Oh, go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, on the setup, I think of stance width is pretty much just a preference, but
Yeah.
Doesn't it have to be still consistent no matter what it is so that the ball position can be consistent?
Oh, yeah.
Like
yeah.
I'll make my people have like, I'll say, all right, so your ball position has to be like a club head in from your lead, from
Yeah.
your lead foot, and then maybe 1.5 from your stance line to your ball position.
Yes, I agree. That's a big thing. So the more consistency you can build in, that's why I went in detail on the setup of the tool. You would have a very clear point of where that button of the grip needs to be in relationship to the leading edge, and that will be the same for the width of your stance. So yes, I will tell people where the blade is, and I will tell people then where the ball is, and I will make a reference for how many balls that's inside the lead heel. So yes, I think that's a very good thing, because the more specific you can be and the more detailed you can be on the setup, the easier it becomes to be consistent with it. And to your point, if you change that piece, you change everything. Yeah, I agree. Anything else before I move on?
Nothing's been submitted.
Okay, good. So here I got just 2 pictures on those different models. So we got Tiger on the left over there, which would be closer to a clamp model, and we got Matt Kuchar over there on the right, which would be more a flying wedge model.
Hey,
Mostly-
Timo,
Yeah.
real quick, I just want to hop in on this.
Yeah, please.
Guys, this was the diagram that completely Timo helped change my putting, because I decided after talking to Timo and David Orr to go with the arm lock model, the Bryson model. But however, I was doing it with the clamp ball position.
Yes.
And
I
Timo,
remember.
you could, if you want to elaborate on that real quick, because once I saw this, I was like, Jesus, I could have done it the right way if I would have just seen this model.
Yeah. So just in that particular case, right? If you want to so first of all, both these models can work, right? And I told you earlier, I want to give my players first less options, because I think the more options you have just creates chaos first and foremost. So you have to give your player less options. So you will have to have a discussion, okay, which model are we setting for? And most of the times that would be something that they already use. So when people come into me and they have an arm lock, I would try to push them to the flying wedge model, because as soon as you do the arm lock, the second segment of the radius moves forward, right, to get the arm lock. If you just keep the club head where it is and you arm lock, you de-loft your putter a lot, which is actually, now we're on that tangent. I might have the picture here. I might not be able to pull it up quickly, but there is this picture that I made of Matt Kuchar, who also has the arm lock, but with a completely different putter, obviously, with the handle all the way back. I also have a picture of him where he has the arm lock like this, where the right arm goes straight into the putter, while here he opts in for the other one. But obviously that cannot be done with the same tool, because that requires a different loft, right? So in your case, Steve, we spoke about how you want to use the arm lock, and therefore the ball position needs to be forward, because that is where you find the more vertical shaft lean. That's where you have the 0-0, right? The more shaft lean you build in, like with the full swing, the more shaft lean I build in. If I show that from down the line, I'm basically presetting my path to go out to the right more, right? So we had to get some shaft lean out by putting while you wanted to have the arm lock, so I would push the ball more forward to get that shaft more vertical in the setup. So that is why your ball position had to be forward, because every time you would have the ball more in the middle towards the clamp model, you would hit balls to the right, or because you're a good player, you would start closing the face at the same time to prevent the ball from going to the right. Does that make sense to everyone? So the 2 pictures over there, and you got more people probably that pop up in your mind now, and you can start categorizing them, right? There's probably another 25 models in between, but I think with just these 2, you have some options, and you can start grabbing a lot of different styles of putting and putting them either in the flying wedge model or the clamp model. You can start explaining how they work. Now, just because I wanted to make this practical, I gave you some things for the setup that I think are important. I gave you this little diagram so you can start mapping your stroke, which I think is important. I also have a couple of lesson spectrums that I made over the years, which might be nice to go over, is where you can see where I apply the system. So I'll just go into that if there's no other questions. So this particular player that I was teaching over there needed to control the face, and the cues were to keep the distance between the button of the club and the radius the same. No deviation in the wrist, and the tilt and turn of the neck and shoulders versus the turning inflection. So if we go to the before pictures, you've got the numbers over here. So he was a 2B, 3B. So there we go. So he was a 2B, which was a pretty straight stroke with the face closed, right? And 3B over here, which is the path going out to the right and the face closing even more. So this was always a guy that closed the face a lot, and sometimes my trick was that he closed the face because he was starting to go too far out, and to prevent the ball from going to the right, he always overdid it by closing the face. So the player was missing putts short and left, and occasionally right, when there was less flexion in the wrist. So his movement to move that putter around and make it aim straighter to the target was the overtaking from the wrist. The neck, notice how the player turns in flexion. You can see how his head moves forward. And the player would radially deviate, blue, so that's over here. You can see the button of the grip. I can zoom in over here. That's why I didn't open the presentation that way, so I can zoom in. You can see the button of the grip over there. So as he was coming through, I'm going to overdo this move just so you recognize. I always make the joke when I do these camps with my colleagues, like with Steve, for example, or with Andy. I always make the joke that my job on the green is way harder because I have to show people the difference in 1 degree, maybe 2 degrees. While the changes on the range are always easy, and you can tell people to get their hips more forward and look at that difference of 10. You got 10 degrees more extension, which is very easy to see. But these are the little things that make players better on the green, and they're always very small. So just zooming in over here, you can see how that button of the grip is more visible, which is the radial deviation. So the more I do it, you can see how that becomes more visible underneath my wrist. So as he would come through, his putt would go out through the radial deviation. So not so much through the arms, but more through the radial. And then at the same time, he would close the face. And you can see as we jump to the picture on the right, because I'm not going to read it all out over there, you can see that there's less of the button of the club visible. And then you can see over here that I'm just tracing the arc that he made with his putter, the yellow line over there. You can see how his arc went in, which was nice, but then it went out. And at the same time, he was closing the face, which is the red. So that's the closed face on the path going out to the right. With the part going out to the right and the face close made the ball go back to the left, and you can see how this ball is slightly more on the left side of the string line over there. I always like to put a string line there when I practice, or put a chalk line down, which I think is the best drill that you can give anyone, a chalk line and a T-gate to learn how to start the ball straight. And you can see on this one how the putter sits more inside, how the arc is more even, how the face is more square to the arc, and how this ball starts straighter over there. And we practiced with the ball on the wrist. So you can see over here, if I zoom in, you can see how the button of the grip sits against the trail wrist. Right, so there's this little gap that I have in the setup. And as he came through, the wrist would overtake and there would be less space over here. So we practiced a ball in between there to keep some distance between the trail wrist and the button of the grip to keep the flying wedge in there as he came through. And I hope we can all agree that those pictures on the right do not look the same as the pictures on the left. And there he was back to 2A. There he was back to a straighter path with the face more square. Next one. I'm not going to read it all out. I'm just going to go with the pictures and show you what happened. Here's another one. I told you at the beginning, or halfway actually, how I have a lot of players that I teach that show up on my lesson book that go into out the most. So here's another one, right? Goes into out. Doesn't have as much radial as the last player, but you can definitely see how that arc goes out, how it sits outside that target line. how the face is twisted close to the left. And I fixed this one slightly different than the other one because, again, this was not through the radial. I added a little bit of a tilt and turn on this one. So you can see more of his back over here in the orange circle, which you didn't see over there. So on the original, he would make a stroke and his arms would just swing out, and there will be no move of the spine over here, right? And you can see on the picture on the right over here that there's more turn and tilt in those shoulders, and that started to pull the arc back inside, so he didn't have to twist the face close as much, which made it easier for him to control the face at the most important point of the stroke, which is our impact, obviously. And I accompanied that with some explanation by pulling up this picture for him and showing how the left shoulder blade here of Cameron Smith shows up more than in his original picture over there. Another one, there was some practice on the upper center because her head would raise up. But the first thing that I really did was changing the setup. So this was 3A, just jumping back for you guys over here, 3A, right? The face pretty square to the arc, but the arc is going in to out. There's another one in to out. So the first thing I did, I changed the setup a little bit. The pelvis was too level, as you can see over here, so we created more pelvic tilt. And here all the deflection came from the upper spine, as you can see, and here we equal that out a little bit throughout the whole spine, and you can see the in to out, and you can see the ball starting to the right over there, which is the 3A. And so this was actually a quite easy lesson because I didn't have to change the face. Most people, they have a path going off and then they make their club head go off to try to compensate for that. That was not the case in this one. This had the club face pretty square to the arc. The path was just out to the right too much. So I only had to change the path really. And the key concept was to not raise up, because when she raised up, when she had more extension in her spine, that was the thing that moved the putter out, right? So a lot of the knowledge that you have as a coach for the full swing, it goes one-on-one into the putting. So if you would have more extension coming through in your full swing, your arms and club would go out. It's the same for the putting stroke. So if I set up and I have more extension coming through, my head would raise up from the wall, my putter would keep going out. So we're practicing exactly the opposite there on the right. So you can see my hand there on her forehead. So I told her head against the wall and trace the arc, basically, just giving her a feel to keep her head stable so she doesn't extend. And there's nothing that pushes that club out as much. Got one more over here. Here we got a 1. I had to put something else in than a 3. So here's the 1A, 1B. Let's just jump back for a second. 1A, so pretty square to the path, but the path is left. And sometimes the ball even went further to the left. And there was another problem that this player had because it was very difficult for her to control the distance. He always ended up short. And I showed her how that was because she moved the butt end of the grip back almost the same amount as the putter. You see that quite a bit actually in people's attempt to make the arc as straight as possible, or they might even have the concept of the putter moving in a straight line. They start to move the butt end of the grip back the same amount as the head, like this. So you can see more extension in my lead wrist over here. But therefore, there's only a little bit of lateral move of the whole putter. There's no angular momentum. There's less power in it. So I showed her this picture first, and I drew a line on the shaft over here, and I showed how that points back off the upper center. And I told her how she should feel how that points more through the center. And we actually did a couple of, because she would always end up short. The only thing she would do to try to get to the hole was the same move on the backstroke, and then make a longer follow through to try to get there. But that speed was all created after impact. So we actually did a couple of test balls where I just told her to do the most amount of flipping. I really told her to do the flipping to feel that she can get the speed in the putter. And then obviously we quiet that down because she would have the opposite move, right? She would reverse flip almost on the backstroke. So I showed her the move of the wrist, And then we quiet that down to keeping the radius in line instead of breaking the radius going back with the button of the grip. We practiced on moving the radius, moving the whole radius, but definitely see more travel in the club face over here than in the button of the grip, while here it was closer together. And then drawing the same line over here, you can see how that points more through the upper center. And we basically got the direction for free, because the further the handle, so she set up nice, but on the backstrokes, you would move the handle further back. And the further the handle would move back, like we said earlier, the more you push the handle forward, path goes to the right. She did the opposite on the backstroke. She would make her backstroke, pull the handle back, and now that face was pointing more to the left. The face and the path were projected more to the left. So just by changing her backswing with the focus on the speed, we got the direction for free. All right. I think that's it. Any questions?
Go for it, Roger.
Yeah, with the flying wedge or target hand low, I see that kind of brings your shoulders parallel to the ground. Do you think that and your gets the path a little better normally than clamp down?
So you're asking if the path is easier to control with the flying wedge model than with the clamp model?
Yeah, with the shoulders being more level to the ground.
I'm not sure if I completely understand your question. So
It seems like when you do target hand low,
Yeah.
the shoulders get more level to the ground than with a clamp
so
down.
when I change my grip, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, so when I change yes, so to your point, when my left hand goes low, it drops the shoulder down a little bit more. And you mean that my shoulders are now more level than when I have this grip, right?
More level with that grip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is player dependent in the sense of how they control the attack angle, which is basically what you're asking over there. But both work. I have a lot of players that have the flying wedge that have the left hand low. So I do see that more often than the other way around with the forward. They can both work, but it's definitely a thing that I would keep an eye on. And what I would say, if you set up with a more level shoulders in the setup with the left hand low, obviously those shoulders would look different in the finish than when I set up with my left shoulder already a little bit higher. So what I would do to make their pattern work is get the setup right, and then show, if you take that setup just forward to the finish, how this shoulder is now higher than when I take the left hand low and coming through. So I always like to combine the setup with the finish and how that changes particular movements. And you just asked for the alignment of the shoulders on that one. I don't really use it to control the angle of attack better, although I do know that you have to control the angle of attack, right? Does that answer your question, Roger?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good.
Go for it, Ryan.
Timo, were you using any technology to measure the, like, say, face path relationship with those outdoor lessons you just as examples?
No, I have a SAM putt lab that I use. Obviously not outside. I just have that in my studio. I mostly use video. I've been looking at some of the. I've used the smaller device, the Capto before. I don't have that anymore. I was looking into other stuff, but I basically mostly use my camera, which helps me enough most of the times. But I'll probably get a Vertex is another one that I saw out there, which looked pretty promising. So yes, I think it's nice to have those numbers, but in my mind, those numbers always come from a model that you use, which produces the numbers. So just having the numbers on its own obviously is nothing, but it's mostly camera based. It's mostly camera based.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay. Which I think is an important point that you're raising up there, right? Because I don't know how many putting lessons you guys all do, but when I started thinking about doing putting lessons, I thought I had to have everything. I thought I had to have the SAM putt lab, and I thought if I go out, I need a Capto, and right. And I would say that's not true. I think we can give a lot of good golf lessons, full swing with just a camera, and I think you can give awesome putting lessons with just a camera. So don't feel like you're holding back because you might not have all the equipment. I think you can do great work with just a camera.
Go for it, Garrett.
Hey, Timo, I apologize if you covered this. I had to step away for a second.
No worries.
Where you're placing the camera down the line?
Yeah, so down the line, I like to be on the target line.
On the target line.
Just on the target line, because
Okay.
I'm not sure if you can see those lines on the ground, right? But all the movement is in front of the player, right? So if I just put a stick down on the ground as the target line to that little hole over there, right? I'm straight behind this red. Can you see the red stick on the ground?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm straight behind the red stick, so I'm filming on top of the putter,
Great.
which gives you a very good idea of what the arc is, right? If you just play it in slow motion, you can draw that arc in nicely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Roger.
Yeah, so about distance control, do you have any specific drill, is your go-to drill to control distance? I use a metronome, but
Yeah.
I'm always looking for other things.
Yeah. I like that. I use the metronome quite a bit, try to find people's tempo. I know I didn't say anything about the speed control in this presentation because there wasn't enough time. So I use the metronome a bit. I use a lot of talking about how you create the speed as well. So my concept, if I can just use 1 minute of your guys' time to explain that, I like to use more of the up and the adduction of the shoulders as the way to move your putter. And I know that you can move it in different ways, right? You can start categorizing players by how they move the putter. That could be more from the tilting and the turning. So this will be more tilting and turning. This will be more up and adduction. Can everybody see the difference? Up and adduction from the shoulders. There's a little bit of tilt going on, but this will be more tilt and turn, right? It's a different kind of stroke. The reason I opt in for the up and the adduction as the main producer of power is because I think as human beings, we are very good at controlling speed with our arm, with our shoulder, right? When we pitch a ball, you can get pretty accurate by moving your arm in this way, right? And if I would do that in front of me, I could toss a ball out there and I could get pretty spot on very quickly. So I think it's easier for people to feel the amount of speed they're creating when they're doing it with the up and the adduction instead of solely with the tilting and the turning, which is how I started out, the tilting and the turning, right? Use your big muscles, but I actually like to use the slightly smaller muscles, you could say, because I had a lot of success with teaching people better speed control by using the up and the adduction. But metronome is good. I do a lot of standard distances, right? So 369 meter, we do meters over here, obviously, so 10, 20, 30 feet. I do a lot of that work just to build in a baseline. Obviously, the green speed is always different. You have uphill, downhill, but you can only start do the plus and minus. You can only solve the formula if you have a baseline. So I like to do a lot of baseline distances so people have an idea of how far they have to stroke. And some people, Bryson will be an example, right? He would know up to the millimeter how far back his putter needs to go for a particular distance. For some people that works. Some people go crazy when they think about stroke length, right? When they think about stroke length, they're just looking at the putter, right? Where's that thing going? But I do like to build in standard lengths, 10, 20, 30 feet, so they get a little bit of an idea how big that stroke needs to be. And then from there, you can do the plus and minus on the uphill, downhill.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I think we can end the session. Timo, thank you so much for the time. It was really good information. I think everyone learned a lot.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to do this. I hope everybody picked up something for their upcoming putting lessons. And if you have any questions, just reach out. And yeah, have a good day.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Steve, for setting it up.
Yep. You
Yeah,
got it.
thank
Thanks,
you. That
Timo.
was great. Loved it.